My name is Elias Morgan, and I'm 28 now, sitting in my own coffee shop in Kernney, Nebraska. The autumn wind rattles the windows as I pore over an old photo of my grandmother Ruth and me, taken when I was 19. Her eyes still held that spark then, even as the confusion was starting to creep in around the edges. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Not because it was particularly special, but because it was the beginning of everything falling apart, and then, somehow, coming back together in a way I never expected. Let me tell you about the day that changed everything. It was 2012, and I was working at Murphy's Auto Repair on the outskirts of town, my hands perpetually stained with grease, my back aching from hunching over engines. I dropped out of community college the year before, much to my father's disgust, and was living at home, trying to figure out what came next. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone, the kind of place where your business was everyone's business, whether you liked it or not. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other. I was replacing brake pads on Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick when I heard my father Gregory's voice drifting through the open bay door. He was on his phone, pacing in that deliberate way he had when he was scheming about something. I couldn't make out all the words over the hiss of the pneumatic wrench, but I caught fragments. Proof she can't manage herself, and legal options. My stomach tightened. I knew he was talking about Grandma Ruth. At 19, I thought I understood the world well enough. I knew my father was a controlling man who measured everything by its potential return on investment. I knew my mother, Mara, would agree with whatever he said to keep the peace, and I knew that Ruth, who had once been the beloved principal of Kernney Elementary, was starting to forget things, where she put her keys, what day it was, sometimes even my name. But I also knew she was still Ruth in all the ways that mattered. She still laughed at my terrible jokes, still remembered every birthday in our extended family, still made the best apple pie in 3 counties. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table picking at Mara's overcooked meatloaf when Gregory outlined his concerns about Ruth's situation. He spoke in that measured tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, but I could hear the calculation underneath. She left the stove on twice last week, and Mrs. Patterson called to say she found her wandering around the Walmart parking lot, confused about where she'd parked. Mara nodded along, her fork making tiny scraping sounds against her plate. "It's just getting worse, Elias. Your father's only thinking of what's best for everyone." I wanted to point out that Ruth had been cooking for 70 years without burning the house down, and that everyone got confused in the Walmart parking lot. That place was a maze designed by sadists. Instead, I asked, "What kind of legal options?" Gregory's smile was thin. "Well, if she's declared incompetent, someone needs to manage her affairs, make sure she gets the care she needs." The way he said care made my skin crawl. My younger sister Hannah slipped me a folded piece of paper as she cleared the dishes. I opened it under the table. "Watch Dad when he's with Grandma." Later that night, I found Hannah in her room hunched over her homework with her headphones on. I tapped her shoulder, and she pulled them off. "What did you mean by that note?" She glanced toward the door, then leaned closer. "I was over there last Sunday while you were at work. Dad kept asking her about her bank accounts, her Social Security, stuff like that, and when she couldn't remember the numbers, he got this look on his face, like he was pleased." The next morning, Gregory announced over breakfast that he was taking Ruth grocery shopping. "She likes to feel useful," he said, "and Elias, you should come along, help carry the bags." Something about the way he said it made my chest tight with dread. Hanson's Grocery had been the heart of Kernney for as long as anyone could remember. The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. The linoleum floors were worn smooth in the main aisles, and handwritten signs advertising weekly specials hung from the ceiling tiles at odd angles. It wasn't much to look at, but it was ours. Ruth seemed confused as we walked through the automatic doors. She kept asking what we needed to buy, but Gregory just steered her by the elbow, saying things like, "Oh, you'll see," and "Let's just browse a bit first." I grabbed a basket and followed them, the wheels squeaking with every turn. Something felt off about the whole situation. Gregory was being too cheerful, too attentive, and I realized, with growing alarm, that he'd insisted Ruth leave her purse at home. "I told her I'd pay for everything," he'd said when I asked about it. "No need for her to worry about money." Near the produce section, we ran into Mrs. Klein, a sturdy woman in her 70s who'd been friends with Ruth for decades. Her face lit up when she saw my grandmother. "Ruth Morgan! How lovely to see you, dear!" She took Ruth's hands in both of hers. "You're looking well." Ruth's expression brightened, though I could see the slight confusion in her eyes as she tried to place the familiar face. "Oh, hello. How nice," she managed, her voice warm but uncertain. "It's Dolores from church. We sat together during the Christmas service, remember?" A spark of recognition flickered across Ruth's features. "Dolores, of course. How are the grandchildren?" As they chatted, I watched Gregory's jaw tighten. He kept checking his watch and glancing toward the deli counter at the back of the store. Whatever he had planned, Mrs. Klein's warm interaction with Ruth wasn't part of it. "Well, we should get going," Gregory interrupted, his hand firm on Ruth's shoulder. "Got some shopping to do." Mrs. Klein looked surprised by his abruptness, but smiled politely. "Of course. Ruth, it was wonderful seeing you. Take care of yourself." As we walked away, I saw Mrs. Klein watching us with a puzzled expression. The deli counter was situated at the back corner of the store, somewhat isolated from the main shopping area. A few other customers milled around, examining the selection of cold cuts and prepared salads behind the glass. Gregory guided Ruth to the counter, where a young employee, couldn't have been more than 16, waited with a tired expression. "Now, Ruth," Gregory said, his voice carrying just loud enough for others to hear, "remember what we talked about. You need to ask for the discount." Ruth looked at him blankly. "What discount, dear?" "For people who can't afford full price, like when you were young and times were tough, remember?" I watched in growing horror as understanding dawned on Ruth's face, not real understanding, but the desperate comprehension of someone trying to please while utterly confused. Her cheeks flushed pink, and she turned to the young man behind the counter. "Excuse me," she said quietly, Could I have some bread and maybe some of that meat, but I can't—" She stumbled over the words, glancing back at Gregory for guidance. "Go on," he urged. "Tell him you can't afford full price." The young employee looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Ruth and Gregory. A middle-aged woman in line behind us shifted awkwardly, pretending to study her shopping list. I felt heat rising in my face, partly embarrassment, but mostly a growing rage at what my father was making Ruth do. "I can't afford to pay full price," Ruth repeated dutifully, her voice barely above a whisper. The kid behind the counter looked genuinely distressed. "Ma'am, I don't think we have a program like that. Maybe I should get my manager?" "Yes," Gregory said quickly. "Get your manager. Let's see what kind of help they have for people who can't manage their own finances." I saw Mrs. Klein at the end of the bread aisle, her face creased with concern as she watched the scene unfold. Ruth stood there, trembling slightly, trapped in a humiliation she didn't understand. That's when I heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the store office.
Daniel Reed emerged from the back office with a stack of invoices in his hand, probably in his early 40s, with graying temples and the kind of steady demeanor that comes from years of dealing with both difficult customers and corporate demands. He'd been managing Hanson's for about 5 years, ever since the original owners retired. He stopped mid-step when he heard Ruth's voice. I watched his expression change from mild curiosity to recognition to something that looked like a mixture of joy and concern. He set the invoices on the nearest checkout counter and walked directly to our little group. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, his voice warm with genuine affection. "Ruth Morgan, is that really you?" Ruth looked up at him, her confusion melting into tentative recognition. Yes, that's me. Do I know you?" Daniel's smile was radiant. "Danny Reed. I was in your 3rd grade class at Kernney Elementary back in '85. You probably don't remember. You taught so many children over the years." But something in Ruth's expression suggested she did remember, at least partially. Her posture straightened slightly, and for a moment she looked like the educator she'd been for 30 years. "Danny," she said slowly. "Little Danny, with the..." She gestured vaguely, frustration flickering across her face as the memory slipped away. "With the hand-me-down clothes and the empty lunch bag," Daniel finished gently. "You used to keep extra sandwiches in your desk drawer, ham and cheese usually, sometimes peanut butter and jelly when times were really tight at home." The change in Ruth was remarkable. Her shoulders went back, her chin lifted, and for that moment she was Principal Morgan again, dignified, caring, remembered. "You were such a sweet boy," she said, her voice steadier than it had been all morning. Gregory cleared his throat impatiently. "Yes, well, this is all very touching, but we were trying to arrange some kind of discount." Daniel's attention shifted to my father, and I saw his expression cool considerably. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met. I'm Daniel Reed, store manager." "Gregory Morgan, Ruth's son." Gregory extended his hand, but Daniel's handshake was perfunctory. "We were hoping you could help with some kind of assistance program. Ruth's having trouble managing her finances these days." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that right?" He looked back at Ruth, then at me. I must have looked as miserable as I felt, because something in his expression softened. "Well, why don't we step into my office and discuss this properly? Mrs. Morgan, would you like to sit down? I think I have some coffee brewing." Daniel's office was cramped and cluttered, with filing cabinets lining 2 walls and a small coffee maker perched precariously on top of a mini refrigerator. He gestured for Ruth to take the more comfortable of the 2 chairs, while Gregory and I remained standing. The air smelled of coffee grounds and old paperwork. "So," Daniel said, settling behind his desk, "you were looking for some kind of assistance program?" Gregory launched into his prepared speech about Ruth's declining mental state and her inability to manage her own affairs. He spoke with the practiced confidence of someone who'd rehearsed these arguments, painting a picture of a woman who was a danger to herself and others.
"The thing is," Daniel interrupted gently, "I remember Mrs. Morgan quite well, not just as a teacher, but as someone who spent her own money to make sure kids in her class had lunch every day. She never made a big show of it, never embarrassed anyone. She just quietly made sure no child went hungry on her watch." Ruth smiled at this, though I could tell she was only catching fragments of the conversation. "That's ancient history," Gregory said dismissively. "We're talking about the present reality. Ruth can't be trusted to handle money anymore. Just last week, she tried to pay for groceries with expired coupons from 1998. And that justifies humiliating her in front of other customers? Daniel's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm trying to establish that she needs supervision. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Mr. Morgan, I've been in retail for 20 years. I can tell the difference between someone who's genuinely struggling financially and someone who's being used to prove a point. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Gregory's jaw worked like he was chewing something distasteful. Ruth looked between them with growing anxiety, sensing the conflict without understanding its source. I don't think I like your implication, Gregory said finally. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating directly that what I witnessed out there was inappropriate. Daniel turned to me. Elias, isn't it? You're Mrs. Morgan's grandson? I nodded, finding my voice. Yes, sir, and thank you for stopping that, for remembering her. Daniel reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. I'm here most days until 6. If you ever need anything at all, don't hesitate to call. Gregory snatched the card from my hand before I could properly look at it. We don't need charity. It's not charity, Daniel said quietly. It's community. Something Mrs. Morgan taught all of us kids back when she was still teaching. Gregory was already helping Ruth to her feet. Come on, Mother, we're leaving. As we headed for the door, Daniel called out, It was wonderful seeing you again, Mrs. Morgan. You made a real difference in my life. Ruth turned back, her face lighting up with one of her rare moments of clarity. Take care of yourself, Danny. And remember, always be kind. The ride home was silent, except for the sound of Gregory's knuckles cracking as he gripped the steering wheel. Ruth dozed in the passenger seat, exhausted by the morning's confusion and stress. I sat in the back, Daniel's business card burning in my pocket where I'd managed to slip it when Gregory wasn't looking. At home, Gregory launched into a tirade about do-gooders and people who don't understand the situation. He paced the living room while Mara nodded along from her spot on the couch, occasionally murmuring agreement. That manager has no idea what it's like dealing with this every day, making it sound like I'm the bad guy for trying to help my own mother. He was just being nice, I said, and immediately regretted opening my mouth. Nice? He undermined everything we were trying to accomplish there, made me look like some kind of monster in front of half the town. Maybe because what you were doing was what? Was trying to get documentation that my mother needs professional care? Was trying to protect her from herself? I wanted to say it was cruel. I wanted to say it was manipulative and calculating and designed more to serve his purposes than Ruth's. Instead, I mumbled, Nothing. Forget it. That's right. Nothing. And if you ever undermine me in public again, you can find somewhere else to live. That evening, Hannah knocked on my bedroom door. She slipped inside and sat on the edge of my bed, her expression serious beyond her 16 years. What really happened at the store? She asked. I told her everything. The planned humiliation, Daniel's intervention, the business card now hidden in my sock drawer. Hannah listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each detail. He's going to put her in Sunset Manor, she said when I finished. I heard him on the phone with them yesterday. It's that state facility over in Columbus, the one that's always in the news for health code violations. My stomach dropped. Sunset Manor had a reputation in the region. It was where families sent relatives they wanted to forget about, where the staff was overworked and underpaid, where residents sat in wheelchairs in the hallway staring at game shows on a mounted television. We can't let him do that. How are we going to stop him? He's her son. He has legal rights. I thought about Daniel's card, about the genuine warmth in his voice when he spoke to Ruth, about the way he'd stood up to Gregory without raising his voice or making a scene. Maybe we're not the only ones who think this is wrong. Hannah was quiet for a moment. You know what I keep thinking about?
Remember when Grandma used to let us help in her garden? She'd show us which plants needed more water, which ones were ready to harvest. She never talked down to us or acted like we were too young to understand. She treated us like we mattered. She still does that. I know. That's what makes this so awful. She's still in there, Elias. Maybe she forgets things, maybe she gets confused, but she's still the same person who taught me to braid friendship bracelets and who always remembered which cookies were my favorites. And Dad acts like she's already dead. I pulled Daniel's card from my hiding place and turned it over in my hands. Daniel Reed, store manager, Hanson's Grocery. A simple card, but it felt like a lifeline. What if we had somewhere else for her to go? I met Daniel the next afternoon during my lunch break. The store was quiet in the mid-afternoon lull, with only a few customers browsing the aisles. Daniel led me to a small seating area near the deli where employees could take their breaks, just a couple of plastic tables and vending machines. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, suddenly feeling awkward. What was I supposed to say? Help me save my grandmother from my father? Daniel poured coffee from a thermos and offered me a cup. "How's Mrs. Morgan doing?" "Not great. My father's He's planning to put her in a state facility, one of the bad ones." I found myself spilling the whole story. The phone calls, the legal maneuvering, Gregory's growing impatience with Ruth's condition. Daniel listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Your grandmother saved my life," he said finally. "I don't mean that metaphorically. My father left when I was 7, and my mother was working 3 jobs just to keep us in that little apartment above the hardware store. There were days when the sandwich and apples she gave me at school were the only food I had. She never made it seem like charity. She'd say she'd packed too much lunch, or that she was trying a new recipe and needed someone to test it." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo from what looked like a school reunion. Daniel in a suit, standing next to an older woman I recognized as Mrs. Patterson, who'd been the school secretary for decades. This was taken 2 years ago at the school's anniversary celebration. Your grandmother was still sharp then, still remembered every kid she'd taught. She told me I'd done well for myself, managing the store and all. Said she always knew I'd find my way. The weight of everything settled on my chest. I don't know what to do. I can't fight him legally. I don't have money for lawyers, and I'm just her grandson anyway. But I can't watch him put her in that place.
Daniel leaned forward. What if she had somewhere else to go? Somewhere safe, where she could maintain her dignity? Like what? Well, Mrs. Klein, you met her yesterday. She's been rattling around in that big house alone since her husband passed. She's sharp as a tack, good company, and she genuinely cares about your grandmother. I spoke with her after yesterday's incident. She'd be willing to let Mrs. Morgan stay with her, at least temporarily. The possibility hit me like a physical sensation, relief mixed with terror. You think she'd really do that? I think there are more people in this town who remember what your grandmother did for them than you might realize. The question is whether you're ready to take that step. Because once you move her out of your father's house, there's no going back. He'll cut you off completely. I thought about Ruth sitting in that chair at Sunset Manor, staring at nothing, forgotten. I thought about Gregory's cold satisfaction when he talked about her incompetence. I thought about Hannah's words, "She's still in there." What would I need to do? Daniel smiled. "Leave that to me. Mrs. Klein and I will handle the arrangements. Your job is to get Mrs. Morgan out of that house without your father knowing until it's too late to stop." I felt something shifting inside me, like tectonic plates finding a new alignment. When? How about tomorrow morning, early, before your father leaves for work? The magnitude of what we were planning hit me all at once. I was about to betray my family, defy my father, and probably destroy any chance of ever having a normal relationship with my parents. But when I thought about Ruth's face in the grocery store,
The way she'd tried so hard to please Gregory, even as she was being humiliated. I knew I didn't have a choice. "Okay," I said. "Tomorrow morning." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the ways the plan could go wrong, all the consequences I hadn't considered. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway and the creak of Ruth's bedroom door opening. I slipped out of my room and crept toward the sound. Gregory was in Ruth's bedroom, going through her dresser drawers by the light of a small flashlight. Ruth was asleep in her chair by the window. She'd been having trouble sleeping in her bed lately, preferring the chair where she could see outside. "What are you doing?" I whispered. Gregory spun around, the flashlight beam catching me in the eyes. "Jesus, Elias, you scared me. What are you looking for?" "Important papers, bank information, insurance policies, things that need to be secured." I watched him slip a small bank book into his jacket pocket. Secured from what? From her forgetting where she put them, from her giving them away to some scam artist who calls pretending to be from the IRS. His voice was reasonable, but there was something predatory in the way he moved through her belongings. Ruth stirred in her chair. "Elias? Is that you, sweetheart?" I went to her, kneeling beside the chair. "I'm here, Grandma." She reached for my hand with fingers that felt fragile as bird bones. "I had the strangest dream. I was back at the school, and all my students were there, but they were grown up. And that nice boy, Danny, he was there too. He thanked me for something, but I can't remember what." Gregory cleared his throat impatiently. "Mother, you should try to get some real sleep, in a proper bed." "I like my chair," Ruth said mildly. "I can see the maple tree from here. Your grandfather planted that tree, you know." "I know, Grandma." "Promise me something, Elias." Her grip on my hand tightened. "Promise me you won't let them put me somewhere I can't see the trees?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Somehow, despite the confusion and memory loss, she understood what was happening. "I promise," I whispered. Gregory shot me a warning look, but I didn't care. I meant it.
After he left the room, I sat with Ruth until she dozed off again. Hannah appeared in the doorway, wearing her pajamas and a worried expression. "I packed some of her things," she whispered, holding up a small suitcase. "Photo albums, her jewelry box, some clothes. I hid it in my closet." I looked at my little sister, really looked at her. When had she gotten so brave? "Are you sure about this? Dad's going to be furious." Hannah's jaw was set in a way that reminded me of Ruth. "She taught me to read, Elias. When I was struggling in first grade and Mom and Dad were too busy fighting about money to notice, Grandma came over every afternoon for 2 months. She made it fun, like we were solving puzzles together. I can't let Dad throw her away." I hugged my sister, feeling the weight of the decision we were making together. "Tomorrow morning, then." I barely slept the rest of the night. By 5 a.m., I was dressed and pacing my room, listening for sounds of Gregory getting ready for work. He usually left around 7:30, which would give us a narrow window. Hannah met me in the kitchen at 6, her face pale but determined. We made coffee and waited, the minutes crawling by with agonizing slowness. Finally, we heard Gregory's shower running. "Go get her ready," I whispered. Hannah nodded and disappeared down the hallway while I called Daniel from the kitchen phone. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. "Everything's in place," he said quietly. "Mrs. Klein has breakfast waiting." By the time Gregory came downstairs, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, trying to look casual. He grabbed his briefcase and travel mug, barely glancing at me. "I'll be late tonight. Client meeting in Lincoln." He paused at the door. "Keep an eye on your grandmother. And Elias, I meant what I said yesterday." As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I ran to Ruth's room. Hannah had helped her into a blue dress I remembered from church services, and her gray hair was neatly brushed. She looked confused, but not distressed. "Are we going somewhere, dear?" she asked as I helped her with her coat. "We're going to visit a friend of yours, Mrs. Klein. Remember her from the grocery store?" Ruth's face brightened. "Oh, Dolores, how nice! I should bring something.
Maybe some of those cookies I made." She trailed off, the memory slipping away. "She's got everything we need," Hannah assured her, shouldering the small suitcase. "We're just going for a visit." The drive to Mrs. Klein's house took 10 minutes that felt like hours. Every car that passed made my heart jump, convinced it was Gregory coming back for something he'd forgotten. But we made it without incident. Mrs. Klein's house was a tidy 2-story with a wraparound porch and flower boxes under every window. She must have been watching for us because she came out before we'd even parked, her arms open wide. "Ruth Morgan, welcome to my home." Ruth smiled uncertainly but allowed herself to be hugged. "Dolores, what a lovely house. Have I been here before?" "Not for a while, dear, but you're always welcome." Daniel was waiting in the living room with a manila folder of papers and a warm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Morgan. You look lovely today." "Thank you, dear. You're very kind." As Mrs. Klein led Ruth to the kitchen for breakfast, Daniel pulled me aside. "These are temporary guardianship papers," he explained quietly. "Mrs. Klein has agreed to serve as emergency caregiver until we can arrange something more permanent. It's all legal. I had a lawyer friend draw them up." My phone buzzed. Gregory's number. I let it go to voicemail. "He's going to be furious," Hannah said, voicing what we were all thinking. "Let him be furious," Daniel replied. "Mrs. Morgan deserves to spend her remaining time with people who see her as a person, not a problem to be managed." From the kitchen came the sound of Ruth's laughter, genuine, delighted laughter. Mrs. Klein was showing her something on her phone, probably pictures of grandchildren or the church ladies group.
"She sounds happy," Hannah observed. "She is happy," Daniel said. "Maybe for the first time in months." My phone buzzed again. Gregory, again. This time I answered. "Where the hell is my mother?" 20 minutes later, Gregory's truck roared up Mrs. Klein's driveway, sending gravel flying. I watched from the front window as he stormed up the walkway, his face dark with rage. I met him at the front door, stepping outside and closing it behind me. Daniel flanked me on one side, Mrs. Klein on the other. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of my father. "Where is she?" Gregory demanded. "She's safe," I replied. "She's where she wants to be." "She doesn't know what she wants. She's not competent to make that decision." Gregory's voice was rising. "You have no right to take her from her own home." "Her own home?" I stepped closer. "You mean the place where you go through her belongings looking for bank books, where you humiliate her in public to build your case for having her declared incompetent?" "I'm protecting her." "From what? From people who actually care about her?" Daniel spoke up. "Mr. Morgan, your mother is a guest here. She's free to leave any time she wants to, but I don't think she wants to." As if to prove his point, Ruth appeared at the living room window. She waved when she saw us, her face bright with contentment. Gregory's expression shifted. "This is kidnapping. I'll call the police." "Go ahead," Mrs. Klein said calmly. "I have all the proper paperwork. And I suspect the police remember Mrs. Morgan fondly. She taught most of their children." "You have no idea what you're doing," Gregory said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "The legal costs alone will bankrupt you, and when she needs real medical care, what then?" "We'll manage," I said, "the way families are supposed to manage." Gregory turned his attention back to me. "Don't think this changes anything between us. You're still my son, and when this fantasy falls apart, don't come crawling back." "I won't." The finality in my voice seemed to surprise him. For a moment, he looked less like the controlling father I'd feared, but more like a man who just realized he'd miscalculated badly. "You're making a mistake, Elias. All of you." "Maybe," I admitted, "but it's our mistake to make." Gregory stood there for another moment, as if waiting for me to reconsider. When I didn't, he walked back to his truck without another word. I watched him drive away, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not triumph,
but relief, like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. Mrs. Klein squeezed my shoulder. "Come inside, dear. Your grandmother was asking for you." I found Ruth in Mrs. Klein's cozy living room, sitting in a recliner by the window with a cup of tea in her hands. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, making everything warm and golden. "Elias," she said, her face lighting up, "I was just telling Dolores about the time you caught that enormous fish at the lake. Do you remember? You were so proud you insisted on carrying it all the way back to the cabin yourself." I sat down on the sofa beside her chair. I did remember. I'd been 12, and the fish had maybe been 8 inches long. But in Ruth's memory, it had grown to legendary proportions. And somehow that felt more true than the actual facts. "I remember, Grandma." "You were always such a good boy," she said, reaching over to pat my hand. "Just always trying to take care of everyone. Just like your grandfather." Outside, I could hear Hannah and Mrs. Klein discussing dinner plans. Daniel was making phone calls, probably arranging for more of Ruth's belongings to be moved. The sounds felt like home. Not the silent, tense home that I'd grown up in, but a real home, where people cared for each other without keeping score. Ruth's attention drifted to the window, where a maple tree cast dappled shadows on the lawn. "Look at that tree, Elias. Isn't it beautiful? All those colors, red and gold and orange, like God spilled his paint box."
She was special, I agree. She'd be proud of you, you know. What you did for her, standing up to your father like that, took real courage. I think about that word, courage. For so long I thought courage meant not being afraid, but Ruth taught me that real courage means being afraid and choosing love anyway. It means recognizing that sometimes the hardest battles are fought not with grand gestures, but with quiet insistence on treating people with the dignity they deserve. She taught me that kindness matters more than being right, I say. Dorothy nods knowingly. That sounds like Ruth. She had a way of teaching lessons that stuck with you long after you thought you'd forgotten them. Outside the window, the October wind sends maple leaves dancing across the street, red and gold and orange, like God spilled his paint box. I think about Ruth watching the seasons change from Mrs. Klein's living room, content and safe and remembered. I think about the weight of recognition, how heavy it can be when wielded as a weapon, how light it becomes when offered as a gift. And I think about the choice I made that morning at Hanson's grocery, not just to save my grandmother, but to save myself from becoming the kind of person who could watch cruelty happen and call it practicality. The story I've written in my notebook is finished now, all 10 parts of it laid out in my careful handwriting. But I know it's not really finished, because stories like this don't end. They ripple outward, touching other lives, inspiring other choices, creating other moments when someone has to decide between what's easy and what's right. Tomorrow, Hannah is bringing her new boyfriend to meet me. She says he works with elderly clients too, and she thinks we'll get along. Next week, Daniel is stopping by to discuss opening a small cafe section in the grocery store, a place where the older folks in town can gather and feel welcomed. And every Tuesday, Dorothy Patterson will come in with her stories and her coffee, and her reminder that the past isn't really past as long as someone is still here to remember it properly. I close the notebook and put it in the box with Ruth's photo and Daniel's business card. Someday, maybe I'll share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone standing at their own crossroads, trying to choose between loyalty and love, between family obligation and moral courage. But for now, it's enough to have written it down, to have honored the memory of a woman who taught me that every person deserves to be seen and valued and remembered for who they truly are, not just for what they can or cannot do. The afternoon light is starting to fade, casting long shadows across the shop floor. In a few hours, I'll close up and drive home to the small house I bought 2 blocks away from Mrs. Klein's old place. I'll make dinner,
and read for a while. Maybe call Hannah to see how her day went. It's a quiet life, but it's mine, built on the foundation of a choice I made when I was 19 years old and thought I knew nothing about courage. Ruth was right about the trees. You have to be able to see them, to watch them change with the seasons, to remember that beauty and growth and loss are all part of the same endless cycle. And you have to be able to share that view with people who love you, really love you, for exactly who you are in this moment, confusion and clarity alike. That's what family really means. Not the people who share your blood, but the people who choose to see you clearly and love you anyway. The people who stand up for you when you can't stand up for yourself. The people who remember your kindness when you've forgotten it yourself. In my coffee shop called Memory Lane, surrounded by the gentle hum of afternoon conversation and the sweet smell of brewing coffee, I understand that this story, Ruth's story, my story, our story, is really about the weight of recognition. How heavy it can be when wielded as a weapon. How light it becomes when offered as a gift. And how sometimes the simple act of being truly seen by another person can save your life. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.